Am I on? Can you hear me back there? Cool. You'll learn a little bit why this is more important than ever. A few years ago, I accepted a new job at this exciting software company. It was to manage a team of test and tools engineers. When I started, my first assignment was to lead the execution of this large cross-functional project tied to a key strategic business initiative. This was for a different team and had nothing to do with the role that I interviewed for, or at least my understanding of it at the time. As you can imagine, those were challenging times. But I persevered, and it all worked out. We had a successful launch that set the stage for many future generations of architectural evolution. Shortly after that, it was time for our annual 360s, which is our feedback program. And I got a lot of good feedback. But one in particular struck me and stayed with me. And that was from an engineer on the team I'd been hired to manage. It went something like this. Please make an effort to learn more about the technologies and services we're working on. When you were managing our team, it often felt like you had a decent handle on the high-level concepts, but you got lost when it came down to the details. As a result, the engineers on the team were never really open to your suggestions and ideas. I know you don't manage our team anymore, but I'm hopeful that you can apply this feedback in your new role. I read that, and I went, wow. It was harsh, right? But it was on point. The range of emotions that raced through my mind spanned the gamut. There was anger, there was hurt, there was shame, right? I failed to earn their respect. I had visions of them thinking of me like the pointy-haired boss, right? Oh my God. So it wasn't fun. And by the way, there was more where that came from. This is the edited version. Anyhow, I took some time to internalize it, got over it, and once I'd done that, I realized there were two takeaways in it for me. A, the courage that this person had demonstrated in delivering that feedback. I mean, at this point, they didn't really have anything to gain, right? And B, the last sentence, I know you no longer manage our team. Well, that's key because the course correction had already been made by the time this feedback had been given. Essentially, it was a bandwidth issue, and so the role was carved up into two. And that was 5 years ago, and the company was Netflix, which is where I work today. I lead a tools engineering team focused on developer productivity and operational insights. When Rob approached me to speak at Calibrate, I reflected upon this experience. And I thought, my own thinking on this has evolved so much over the years. Why don't I choose feedback as a topic to talk about today? So, when you think of feedback, what's the primary purpose of feedback? It is, in this context, for us to grow, right? Grow as individuals and grow as a team. In other words, improvement. Now, the manufacturing industry has taught us, and they learned decades ago, about this idea of continuous improvement, right? And it's proven to be a very effective way to be better in terms of products and processes. Now, in our own industry, of late, it's been adopted aggressively, and we're all familiar with practices of Agile, DevOps, continuous delivery, and so on. So what about it? If feedback is all about improving us as individuals and as teams, and continuous improvement is about an ongoing effort to improve your products and processes, well, then we can think of continuous feedback as a way to work on an ongoing effort to improve ourselves, right? And this is not new or radical by any means, but it took me some time to connect the dots, which is interesting considering my team and I had spent 2 years putting together a continuous delivery solution for our service. I'd written about it, blogged about it, spoken about it, but I never quite thought of it in those terms. Once I did that, it started to make sense. So continuous feedback is sort of applying the same principles and lessons we've learned in Agile and DevOps and continuous delivery to the way we provide feedback to ourselves and to our teams. So, why don't we practice it more often, right? We're all sold on Agile and DevOps and all that good stuff. Well, it's hard, especially delivering critical feedback. It's hard. It's hard to deliver. It's harder to receive. And so when something is hard, what do? Don't do it. Or procrastinate or delay. So by doing that, we're actually missing out on a very powerful development tool, right? That can help us grow and our teams grow. So the rest of my talk today then is going to focus on a few ways and practical tips and ideas that I hope you can adopt or adapt and employ in your own workplace as you go about creating a culture that values feedback, right, at your workplace. Again, going back to DevOps and Agile and that analogy, the one thing we hear a lot is it's about the culture. You can build the tools, it's about the culture. The culture is this nebulous thing, and it's a topic unto itself, and I think there's another talk later that touches upon this. But I will say one thing. As a leader, one of your primary responsibilities is to establish and define a culture for your team. These are the things that you value, right? And I'm here to say that as you do that, you should include this strive for getting better and improvement, continuous feedback and continuous improvement as part of your team's culture. Okay. So you're going to set the culture and make it such that people value feedback. That's great. But can you do it by yourself? No. You can and you should establish the culture, define it, and help shape it. But at the end of the day, you need commitment. And I think Kate earlier talked about how you need engagement and commitment from your team. It's like anything else. Anytime you try to institute a change or introduce a new idea, well, you need commitment and participation from your team. So let's look at how you can go about establishing a culture that values continuous feedback. Start with the why. Set the right context. Why are we doing this? It's not because you went to this leadership conference and some woman from Netflix said continuous feedback was great, so you're going to go back and do it, right? That could be your own pointy-haired boss moment. You don't want that. So focus on why it's important. And here I would say the focus needs to be on improvement and growth. The purpose of feedback, again, is for us to get better. Examples always help, right? Examples of actions you took and the impact it had. Another analogy that I find helpful is to think of it in terms of human debt. So think of it like tech debt, right? You don't want to let it build up. And if you do, one day that pager is going to go off at 3 a.m. and it's that crafty old piece of code that you knew you should have taken care of, right? It's the same thing. Harmful habits or bad behaviors can build up over time and snowball into something much bigger. So trying to keep it under control and early and often is definitely helpful. So that was a little bit about the why. Hopefully, you've set the right context. Okay, that's cool. We're going to practice continuous feedback. So what am I supposed to do? Set expectations for your team. This part's important, right? For some, depending on the makeup of your team and the background that they come from, they might be very used to the traditional notion of feedback, where it's a one-way street. You have this once-a-year performance review where there's this form and there are ratings, and if you're lucky, something good comes of it, but it's rare. And then maybe you get, you're somewhere on the bell curve and you quibble about it, and that's that. So this is not that, right? Talk about what your role is going to be. They're going to hear from you early and often, good and not so good. And so you don't want them wondering, why on earth is why is my manager telling me I suck every other day or, twice a week? That's not the idea. It's how do you get better? The role of the team. This is important. Everyone has a role to play in ensuring that the team is operating at its highest level. And providing constructive, actionable feedback to your teammates is a key part of your role as well. I was reminded of this a few months ago when a manager I knew had to make the tough call to terminate an employee. I was talking to the manager and asking them how their team was doing in light of that situation. And the manager said, they're doing pretty well, actually. Everybody is in support of the decision. And in fact, I've had more than one person say to me, I'm so glad you did it. Things were so bad that, I had one foot out the door. I heard that, and I thought to myself, oh, if it was this bad, why didn't someone say something earlier, right? And I thought about, well, how would I know if something like that is going on in my own team? And the key there then is to tell your employees, tell the folks on your team that it is as much a part of their job to be open about this as it is yours as a leader. So now we've talked about the why and the what. Let's talk about how. So, mechanics. I have some examples here, but it's totally up to you. We're all familiar with project retrospectives, sprint retrospectives, one-on-ones, absolutely. Oral or written. I'm sure there's a formal process that every company has, but in addition to that, two things I want to call out here. 360s. How many people are familiar with this notion of 360 feedback? Okay, fair number. So this is where you hear from everybody you interact with in various capacities. And I'm a huge fan of this. What this is meant to indicate is if you can imagine each of these red dots being a person, and then each of these lines represents a unique relationship, right? And so that's an opportunity for feedback in a totally different perspective. So definitely encourage that. We practice it extensively at Netflix, and my colleague Greg's here. I think he'll agree with me that it's really effective. Of course, it depends on how candid people are, but the key is a couple of things I think in the way we do it make it really effective. A, it's not anonymous, right? So it forces you as a person delivering the feedback to demonstrate that courage. B, it gives the recipient an opportunity to go follow up with them. And C, gives you different perspectives. If one person said it, gave you a piece of feedback that you might think of it as an outlier, but if 4 people are saying the same thing, then there's a pattern, right? That highlights a pattern. Another thing to think about, leverage HR. Oftentimes when you're a new manager, you're not quite sure what to go to HR for. I certainly wasn't clear. I thought they did offer letters and resignations and benefits and that type of stuff. But think about it. They're the experts in this people stuff, right? Enlist their help. They're your partners. If you're in a really small company, which I think several of you are, it's a great opportunity to work with them to see how you can help shape or influence the culture of your company. So work with them. Whatever you do, keep it lightweight. You're going to have a tough time, right, getting adoption and engagement if they're going to have to fill out forms and sit through meetings and whatnot. So work on your own variations of this, but you get the idea. Now I want to touch on something that I briefly mentioned earlier. Why don't we do it? Because why don't we practice it more often? Because we know it's a good thing to do. And that's because it's hard, it's difficult, and there are some inherent fears. There may be a fear of damaging relationships. There may be a fear of being thought of as a tattletale. Or, hey, if it's your manager, there may be fear of thinking of it as a career-limiting move. Do you really want to tell your manager they're terrible at something? Well, you do on the promotion, right? And things like that. A couple things here you can do. Lead by example, right? One thing I've done is to say something like, hey, I've been told that oftentimes I speak very softly and I don't project. I'm working on that. How am I doing? I'm working on that. Have you noticed a problem lately? Or have you noticed an improvement? Or if you see me lapse into that behavior, can you nudge me, right? Things like that. So you're demonstrating vulnerability there. Encourage peer feedback. Again, going back to those lines we talked about, their interactions are different. And if someone comes to you with feedback about someone else, encourage them to have the conversation one-on-one. The other one that I find particularly powerful is this notion of decoupling feedback from incentives. And this, again, helps keep the focus on improvement. So your pay raise or your bonus or promotion is not linked to that. You just stagger the two. In fact, it helps because you're giving people a chance to work on whatever it is that they need to improve on by the time it's time for the compensation review cycle or whatever it is, promotions. So once you've done the what and the how, it's really now, there's no getting around the fact that it's time to put it into action, right? It's all about practice. And like anything that's hard to do, exercise and push-ups, in my case, it's all about getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. Take every opportunity, right? After important events, maybe someone's just presented, gone through a design review or done a talk or whatever it is. One-on-ones. Mentioned it briefly before, absolutely make it a part of your one-on-one. Maybe it's a structured thing. Every fourth one-on-one you talk about it. Or maybe some people need some advance notice. Like I'll say, hey, next time, can we talk about what feedback you have for me, right? Things like that. Definitely in the moment, as much as possible, so while it's fresh in everybody's minds. Spend a lot of time on delivering tough feedback and critical feedback. Absolutely do not forget the kudos, right? And especially encourage compliments and kudos at a peer level, because that means more. So one thing, for instance, we've instituted here within our team, and I've had this in previous teams as well, is just a simple kudos program where you can say, hey, good job, you jumped on the production issue last night, or whatever it is. So I want to go back to the story I started out with. In a strange twist, the person who gave me that feedback ended up reporting back to me a few years later. And this time around, obviously the original issue had been corrected, but I also had an opportunity to implement some of what I talked about. And when the 360s rolled around, the feedback read something like this. This is the second time I'm part of your team, and I see a marked difference in your leadership. You ask deep, probing technical questions, and make some tough decisions, and that gives me the confidence that you'll lead us down the right path. I read it, and needless to say, it was very rewarding. Well, first off, for obvious reasons, who doesn't like to read good things about themselves, right? But I think more importantly, it was rewarding because the effort that I put in to build that feedback muscle, I saw that paying off. And so I'd like to leave you with this message. If you work on building your feedback muscle, feedback doesn't have to be this annual cringe-inducing exercise, which some might even think of it as an exercise in futility, right? You're filling out 5 pages of forms. Make it a part of the day-to-day rhythm of your team, and the benefits of that, you'll see it for yourself and for your team. Create an environment that encourages people to give and to seek feedback explicitly. And hopefully some of the what, why, and how that I talked about today will help you in doing that. So I have. Thank you.